I poured alcohol over my wife while she was on her knees praying. I lit the match. I threw it. And what happened in the next 3 seconds is the reason I am still alive. The reason my marriage is still alive. The reason my children still speak to me. But none of that is the part I need to tell you first. First, I need to tell you who I was before that night, because if I skip that part, you will hear the miracle and think it was easy, and it was not easy, and the man who received it did not deserve it. And I want you to understand exactly what kind of person Jesus walked into that bedroom for, because that person might be someone you recognize. Before we go any further, leave a comment right now, telling me where you are watching from and what time it is there. I want to see how far this story is reaching today. My name is Dale Merritt. I am 61 years old. I live in Harlan County, Kentucky, in a house I own with my wife, Patricia, who has been married to me for 31 years, and who is the only reason any good thing has ever happened in my life. I want to tell you that clearly before I tell you anything else. She is the reason, not me. I spent 31 years making that woman's life harder than it had any right to be. And she stayed, and she prayed, and she believed something about me that I could not see in myself, and eventually what she believed became true. But it took a long time, and it got very, very bad before it got any better. I grew up in this county, 3rd generation Harlan. My grandfather worked the coal mines. My father worked the coal mines. When the mines started shutting down in the 90s, my father switched to whatever came next, which was odd jobs and long absences and the bottle. I want to be honest about my father, because I became him, and becoming him did not happen by accident, and understanding how it happened is part of the story I need to tell you. My father was not a cruel man by nature. He was a man who had been formed inside a world that rewarded toughness and punished tenderness, who had never been given any tools for the interior life, who had no language for pain except the language of anger, and no remedy for emptiness except the one that came in a bottle. He was not trying to hurt us. He simply did not know how to be otherwise. And by the time anyone might have helped him learn, the pattern was too deep, and the will to change it was already buried under too many years of choosing not to look at it. I watched my father my entire childhood, and I absorbed every lesson he taught without knowing I was learning them. I learned that a man stands on his own, that asking for help is weakness, that God is a crutch for people who cannot carry their own weight, that women cry and men endure, and the difference between those two things is the line between dignity and collapse. I learned those lessons so thoroughly that by the time I was a grown man, they were not lessons anymore. They were me. They were the entire structure of who I was. I started working at a bar when I was 22, not because I planned to. I want to describe that bar to you because it is not incidental to the story. It was called Denny's Tap Room, a roadside place on Route 119, the kind that has been in the same location for 30 years because the clientele does not change and the markup on draft beer is reliable. Ernie Dawson ran it, a heavy-set man with a gift for being in exactly the right place in the room when something was about to go wrong and redirecting it before it did. I understood his tolerance for the inventory discrepancies that accumulated over my years there as generosity at the time. I understand it now as a different kind of failure to intervene. The bar was open from noon to midnight Monday through Saturday. I worked evenings, which meant I was there for the tail end of the afternoon drinkers and the full span of the night drinkers, the men who came in after work for 2 beers and became men who came in for whatever it took to get through the night. I knew all of them by name. I knew which ones were in the middle of a divorce and which had just gotten laid off, and which had a sick parent, and which were simply there because the bar was the most comfortable place they had. I was, in the language I would learn later, an enabler at an industrial scale, professionally skilled at making the thing that was killing people's lives feel manageable. I saw the progression up close, what alcohol does over the long span, the specific hollow quality it produces in a face after 10 years. I saw it clearly every night from behind that bar, and I applied none of that seeing to myself. I walked in one day looking for construction work, And the owner, a man named Ernie who has since passed, was short-staffed and offered me a shift, and I took it. I was good at it. I am not going to pretend otherwise. I could read a room. I could read people. I knew when someone needed the drink refilled and when they needed to be cut off, and when they needed someone to lean on the bar and let them talk. I was good at the job, and the job suited something in me that I did not examine too closely, which was that I liked being the man in the room who was in control, who knew things, who was competent while everyone around him was progressively less so. The drinking that came with the job started slowly. A beer at the end of a shift to come down. 2 beers. A shot with a regular. A habit. A need. By the time I was 30, it was not a habit anymore. It was the structure my days were built around. I never thought of myself as an alcoholic because I could function. I went to work. I paid the bills. I did not fall down in public. The bar gave me the perfect cover for the drinking because it normalized it, because I was surrounded by it every night, because I could tell myself that everyone who did what I did for a living drank the way I drank, and that made it ordinary rather than what it actually was. Patricia. I need to tell you about Patricia because she is the center of this story and she is the reason I am telling it at all. I want to stop here for a moment before I describe her, because I have been thinking about how to describe her for 3 years, and I have not found the right way to do it, and I am going to try again right now. The problem is that the words that exist for describing a faithful woman are words that have been used so many times that they have lost the weight they are supposed to carry. Patient, devoted, long-suffering. Those words are all true and none of them are sufficient. They describe the category without capturing the specific person, and Patricia is a specific person, and she deserves more than a category. What she had was something I have only found one word for since I started going to church, and the word is grace. Not grace in the decorative sense, not grace as a synonym for elegance. Grace in the theological sense, which means receiving something you did not earn and could not have purchased and have no right to expect. Patricia extended something to me for 30 years that I had done nothing to deserve and everything to disqualify myself from. And she extended it not because she was a doormat or because she did not understand what was happening to her, but because something in her genuinely believed that I was worth it. That belief was not rational by any ordinary measure. By any ordinary measure, I had forfeited any right to that belief 100 times over. She held it anyway, and the holding of it was the most courageous thing I have ever witnessed in my life. Courage is usually described as doing something difficult in the presence of danger. Patricia's courage was staying something true in the presence of 30 years of evidence that the truth was not going to come back. I met her when I was 26. She was 24, working at the pharmacy on Main Street, a woman with dark hair and a way of being still that I had never seen before in anyone. She was not the kind of still that comes from shyness or from not having anything to say. She was the kind of still that comes from being settled inside yourself, from knowing who you are and not needing the room to confirm it. She was the most grounded person I had ever met, and I fell for her completely within about 3 weeks of knowing her. She came from a church family. She was a believer, open about it, not preachy, just genuinely and quietly committed to it the way some people are committed to breathing. She told me on our 3rd date that her faith was the most important thing in her life. I said that was fine. I meant it at the time. I did not understand yet what I was agreeing to. We got married in 1993. Harlan County Courthouse, small reception at her parents' house, nothing fancy. I was happy that day in the way that I was capable of being happy at 29, which was not completely, because a man with a wall as thick as mine can only receive joy through a narrow opening. But I was happy. She was everything I had not known I needed, and the early years of the marriage had a quality to them that I ruined slowly and then faster, and eventually very badly over the 30 years that followed. We had 2 kids. Our son Jason came first, 1995. Our daughter Melissa in 1998. Those kids grew up in a house that had a specific atmosphere, the atmosphere of a house where one person is always monitoring the other one, where the sound of a car in the driveway has a different meaning depending on the time of night, where children learn from an early age to read adult faces the way they should be reading books. Jason learned to stay quiet. Melissa learned to try to fix things. Neither of those skills served them well later, and I am the reason they had to develop them. The years passed the way years pass in a life like mine, in the specific blur of sameness and escalation that alcoholism produces, where each year resembles the year before it except slightly worse, where the incidents get more frequent and more serious, where the apologies become more elaborate, and the promises become less credible, and the window of sobriety between one episode and the next becomes shorter. Patricia prayed through all of it. I know this now in a way I did not know it then. She prayed in the mornings before I was awake. She prayed in the bathroom with the faucet running so I would not hear her. She prayed in the car in the parking lot of the pharmacy before her shift. She prayed sitting in the pew at her church, which I had stopped attending before our second anniversary, on Sunday mornings while I slept off Saturday night. She prayed for me for 30 years with a consistency and a faithfulness that I did not know about and would not have respected if I had. I want to tell you something about what it is like to be married to a praying woman when you are the man she is praying for and you do not believe in prayer. Actually, let me be more specific than that. I want to tell you what it was like in the specific years of the marriage when things were at their worst, because that is the part that is hardest to describe and most important to describe honestly, because the people who most need to hear this story are probably married to someone in exactly that place right now, and they need the honest account, not the softened one. There were years when I look back now and I am genuinely ashamed in a specific and concrete way at what I put her through. Not the general shame of a man who knows he was a bad husband. The specific shame of remembering specific nights, specific words, specific expressions on her face that I put there, and then walked away from, without acknowledging what I had done. The years when the drinking was at its worst, and the cruelty that came with it was also at its worst, when I would come home from the bar and find reasons to start arguments that had no rational basis, when the anger that I had nowhere else to put would find Patricia as its available target, because she was there, and she stayed, and she did not leave. And I used her staying as a kind of permission for the behavior, as evidence that it was not as bad as it was. I think about those years, and I think about the fact that she was praying through them. In the bathroom with the tap running, in the car in the parking lot. On Sunday mornings in a pew I had vacated before our second anniversary. She was taking to God the specific weight of what was happening in that house, and asking for something I gave her no rational reason to believe was coming. And she kept asking, and she kept believing, and she was right. And I cannot fully account for what it means that she was right, except to say that it is the single most convincing evidence I have encountered in 61 years for the reality of a God who does not work on human timelines and does not let human evidence determine what is possible. I want to tell you something about what it is like to be married to a praying woman when you are the man she is praying for and you do not believe in prayer. It is infuriating. That is the honest answer. Not because prayer itself infuriates me in retrospect. It does not. But at the time, Patricia's faith functioned in my mind as a continuous commentary on my inadequacy. Every time she went to church without me, I heard, "You are not the husband you should be." Every time she bowed her head before a meal, I heard, "You are not the spiritual leader of this home." Every time she forgave me for something I had done the night before with a gentleness that was genuine and unperformed, I heard, "You do not deserve this, and you both know it." The faith was a mirror, and the man in the mirror was not someone I was able to look at directly, so I did what I had learned to do with things I could not look at. I attacked them. I made her faith the problem. I told her it was weakness. I told her she was teaching our children to be dependent and passive. I took her Bible from her nightstand and threw it in the trash. She bought another one. I found that one too eventually, and threw it away too. She found a third one and hid it. She hid her faith in my house the way a person hides a valuable thing from someone who will destroy it. And she went on praying in the spaces I could not monitor. Jason left when he was 26. I remember the night he left with the particular sharpness that the mind reserves for moments that you know, even as they are happening, are going to cost you for the rest of your life. He had come home to help Patricia with something, and I had been drinking, and we had gotten into an argument about something I cannot even reconstruct now, and I said something to him that I will not repeat here because some things do not need to be preserved in the telling, and he looked at me for a long moment and said, "I am not doing this anymore," and he picked up his keys, and he left. He called Patricia the next day to make sure she was all right. He did not call me. He did not call me for a long time after that. Melissa stayed longer. She had the specific persistence of the child who believes that love, applied with enough consistency, can change a situation that love did not create and cannot fix. She stayed until a night when she came over for dinner, and I came home from the bar, already drunk, and said something to Patricia in Melissa's presence that made Melissa stand up from the table and say, "Mom, come with me right now." Patricia said she was staying. Melissa looked at her mother for a long time, and then she left, and I watched her go from the kitchen window, and I did not stop her, and I did not go after her, and I told myself that was fine, and that they were both overreacting, and that the house was better without the drama. That is what I told myself. I was very good at telling myself things. The months after Melissa left were some of the worst, not because anything dramatic happened, because nothing happened. The house got quieter. Patricia and I moved through it, like two people who have learned to occupy the same space without making contact, not from coldness exactly, but from the specific mutual exhaustion of two people who have been in the same difficult situation for so long that they have used up all the available language for it. She still prayed. I still drank. The machinery of our diminished life ran on without producing anything except more of the same. Then I got fired. I had been working for Ernie's bar for 20 years, and after Ernie died, his nephew Glenn took over. Glenn was 32 years old, and he had a business degree and a specific talent for identifying which parts of a legacy operation were inefficient and removing them. I was inefficient. I was slow, and I was expensive, and I had been drinking from the inventory for years in the way that bartenders do when no one is watching closely. And Glenn was watching closely. He called me into the back office on a Tuesday afternoon in October, 4 months before the night I am going to tell you about, and he told me that my employment was terminated effective immediately and that I should collect my personal items and leave. I want to tell you what that did to me, not because I expect your sympathy, but because it is important for you to understand the specific shape of the man who walked into his bedroom 4 months later with a gallon of alcohol and a box of matches. The bar had been my identity for 20 years. I was not a husband who was also a bartender. I was a bartender who was also, incidentally, a husband and father. The bar was where I was competent, where I was known, where I had a role and a function and a position. It was the last thing in my life that gave me a clean, uncomplicated reason to believe that I was a person of some value. Without it, I was just a drunk in a house in Harlan County, with a wife who prayed, and children who had left, and an age that made finding new employment significantly more complicated than the last time I'd looked for it. I spent the 4 months after being fired drinking more than I ever had, which is saying something. I slept late, and I went to the gas station for beer, and I came home, and I sat in front of the television, and I told myself tomorrow would be different, and it was not different. Patricia went to work, and came home, and cooked, and cleaned, and prayed, and said little. I do not know how she sustained herself during those months. I know it was not anything I gave her. The night it happened was in February, a Tuesday. I want to describe that day to you in its specific texture because the specific texture of it matters for understanding what happened that night. And because I think one of the things that makes stories like mine difficult to believe is that they are often told as though the before and the after are clean and distinct, as though the person who did the thing was a different person from the person who received the grace. And that is not how it was. The person who poured the alcohol was the same person who went to his knees on the floor. The same hands. The same history. The same accumulated damage and accumulated choices. This is important because it means the grace was not given to someone who had already improved or changed or shown some indication of being ready to receive it. It was given in the middle of the worst version of the worst thing. And if you have someone in your life who seems impossibly far from where they need to be, I need you to understand that this is relevant to them. The distance does not disqualify them. It did not disqualify me. The day had started the way most days had started in those 4 months, which was with the specific gray weight of a man who has nothing to go to. I had been waking up around 9 or 10, later when the previous night had been particularly bad, and making my way to the kitchen for coffee, and then to the living room for the television, and then to the gas station for beer, and then back to the living room for more television and more beer, until the evening blurred into night, and the night became another morning. Patricia went to work. I sat in the house. This had been my life for 4 months, and I had found ways to not look at it directly, which was the same skill I had been applying to various aspects of my life for decades, and which I had by that point practiced to a level of proficiency that even I found slightly impressive in retrospect. That Tuesday was different only in the specific quality of the despair. It had been building for several days into something with more density than usual, more weight, less manageable by the ordinary methods of distraction and alcohol. I could not have told you what was driving it. In retrospect, I can identify it as the specific crisis of a man who has been running from himself for 58 years and is running out of places to go. But I did not have that analysis available to me at the time. What I had available to me was the television and the bottle and the specific cold Kentucky February outside the window, and a house that was very quiet in a way that had stopped feeling like peace and started feeling like a verdict. I had drunk more than usual by the time Patricia came home from work. She made dinner. I did not eat much. She cleared the dishes. I went back to the living room. She went to the bedroom. The house was quiet. And then, sometime around 11, I stood up, cold the way Kentucky February is cold, the kind that comes in through the walls. I had been drinking since the afternoon. By the time the evening was over, I had gone through more than I usually drank even by the standards of those months, driven partly by a specific despair that had been building all day for reasons I could not have articulated at the time, and can now name as the despair of a man who has looked at his own life for long enough that he can no longer avoid what he sees there. Patricia had gone to bed early, or what I assumed was bed. I had been in the living room with the television on and a bottle for company. I stood up at some point around 11. My legs worked with the specific unreliability of legs that are asked to operate after that amount of alcohol. I made my way down the hallway to the bedroom. The door was open a crack. The light inside was very low, the small lamp on Patricia's side of the bed, and in that low light I saw her. She was on the floor beside the bed on her knees, her back toward the door, her hands clasped in front of her face. The Bible I had not known she still had was open on the bed in front of her. She was praying. Her voice was so low, it was almost nothing, barely a vibration, the kind of sound you feel more than hear. She had learned to pray like that in my house. She had learned to make herself small and silent around her faith, the way a person learns to make themselves small and silent around something dangerous. I stood at the door and I watched her. What I felt in that moment was not what a sober man would feel. It was not grief for what I had taken from her or shame for what I had made her hide. What I felt was the irrational fury of a man who has been drunk for most of 4 months and who has run out of things to be angry at except the most available target. Which was the thing in front of him? I looked at my wife on her knees praying for the man I was, and I felt something come up from underneath all the other feelings, something older and darker and more specific, a hatred that was directed not really at her faith but at what her faith kept insisting was true about me, which was that I was worth praying for, because a man who knows he is not worth praying for cannot stand to be told that he is. I went back to the kitchen. I opened the cabinet under the sink. The gallon of rubbing alcohol was there, the large one I used for cleaning and for the specific utilitarian purposes of a house in an older rural county where you keep certain things on hand. I took it. I walked back down the hallway. Patricia was still praying. I came through the door. I stood behind her, and I unscrewed the cap and I poured it over her. The sound she made when the cold liquid hit her, the sharp gasp, and then the scream as she scrambled to her feet and turned to look at me, her hair plastered to her face and her clothes soaked through. That sound is something I will carry for the rest of my life, not as punishment, as memory, as the specific evidence of how far a man can travel from the person he was supposed to be when no one ever shows him the direction back. She looked at me with those eyes, wide and wet and not comprehending yet what was happening. I had the matchbox in my hand. "You have been praying," I said to her. "Then pray now. Let him help you now." I do not fully remember my own voice saying those words. I remember the words themselves, and I remember the specific cold clarity that had replaced whatever the alcohol was supposed to produce. The feeling of a man who has made a decision and is following it to the end, with the particular terrible focus of someone who has stopped caring what comes after. I struck the match. I saw the flame. I looked at her face, and I threw it. What happened in the next 3 seconds is the part I cannot tell you in any way that will be adequate. And I am going to tell you anyway because it happened, and I was there, and I owe you the honest account of it. There was a flash of light, not fire, not the orange-yellow ignition of alcohol catching flame, which I have seen behind a bar more times than I can count, and which has a specific character to it that is unmistakable. This was something else entirely. White, complete. The kind of light that does not illuminate a space but replaces it, that does not come from a source you can locate, but is simply present in every inch of the room at once. It happened in less than a second, and it was followed immediately by the specific sensation of the atmosphere of that room changing in a way that I have never felt in any other context before or since. The fire was there, and then it was gone. Not out the way a fire goes out. Gone the way something goes when something larger has arrived, and the first thing understands that it has no authority in the presence of the second thing. Patricia was standing in the middle of the room, dry. Her hair and her clothes were dry. The Bible on the bed behind her was dry. There was no smell of alcohol, no smell of burning, nothing that would have told you anything had occurred except the matchbox in my hand, and whatever was on my face when I understood what I was looking at. And then I saw the other thing. I am not going to tell you I saw a face. I did not see a face. I am going to tell you what I saw, which was a presence, a figure. Standing beside Patricia in the middle of that bedroom in the light that had not yet fully receded, close to her, facing me, with the specific quality of standing that belongs to something that does not need the room's permission to be there. I could see the outline of it. I could see the posture. I could see one hand extended, not toward me, toward her, the gesture of someone who has just moved to stand between a person they are protecting and the thing the person needs protecting from. I backed against the wall. My legs went out. The wall was the only thing holding me up. And then my name, Dale. A single word, one word, my name. But the way it was said. I have tried for 3 years to explain to people what the way it was said was like, and I have never found language sufficient for it. So I am going to give you the closest I can get, and ask you to understand that the closest I can get is not the same as the thing itself. It was said the way you say the name of someone you have known their entire life, someone whose history you carry completely, someone you have been watching for a long time and have been waiting to reach. It was said with a knowledge that was not neutral. There was no neutrality in that voice, but there was also no anger, no accusation, no sentence being handed down. What there was instead was the specific quality of grief that belongs to love, not love disappointed, love witnessing. The grief of someone who has watched something happen for a long time and has waited for the moment when the watching could finally give way to something else. Then he showed me things. I do not have a better word than things. They were not visions exactly. Not the way visions are described in the books I have read since. Not sequential or narrative. They were more like an understanding that arrived all at once, a complete and unfiltered knowledge of specific things that I had spent decades choosing not to know fully. I saw Patricia in the bathroom with the tap running, her lips moving, praying for me in secret because I had taken even the right to pray openly from her in her own home. I saw Jason the night he left, his face in the car window as he pulled out of the driveway, the expression on a 26-year-old man's face when he has decided that survival requires leaving his mother behind. I saw Melissa at the dinner table standing up and asking her mother to come with her. The specific posture of a daughter who has been trying to shield her mother for 20 years and has finally reached the limit of what shielding can do. I saw my own father. Let me tell you about that specifically, because it was the part of what I was shown that cost the most, and that I have thought about the most in the 3 years since. Not the angry version. Not the version I had been living inside and reproducing for 58 years. The version that existed before any of it. The young man he had been at the beginning. Before the coal and the bottle and the leaving. Before any of the pattern had established itself. I saw him the way I had never been able to see him in his actual life, which was whole. Complete. A person who had been made with the same possibilities as anyone else, and who had been given by the world he was born into a very narrow set of tools for navigating those possibilities, and who had done what people do when the available tools are insufficient for the situation, which is to use the ones you have, even when they damage things you do not want to damage. I saw him, and I understood something about him that I had never been able to understand while I was in the middle of resenting him, which was that he was me. Not metaphorically, structurally. The same inheritance, the same pattern, the same wound in the same location producing the same behavior in the same direction. I had spent my adult life becoming my father while telling myself the story of how I was nothing like my father, and the gap between those two things, between what I was telling myself and what I was doing, was the gap that the wall was built to cover. Seeing my father that way, that specific night, broke something in me that I had not known was breakable. The resentment I had carried toward him for my entire adult life, the resentment that was the engine of so much of the damage I had done, was not gone exactly, but it was seen in a different light. And what it was seen as was not justification for the things I had done, but evidence of how far back the original wound went, of how many generations the pattern had been running before I received it, of how much of what I had done to my children was the same thing my father had done to me, which was the same thing his father had done to him. The long chain of men who did not know how to be otherwise passing what they had to the next one. The chain had to stop somewhere. That is what I understood. The chain had to stop somewhere, and it had not stopped with my father, and it had not stopped with me until that night, and the question of whether it would stop with Jason, whether Jason's son Caleb would grow up in a different kind of inheritance, depended on what I did with what I had just been shown. I saw my own father, not angry, not the version of him that I had spent my adult life becoming, the version of him that existed before the coal and the bottle and the years of it. A young man who had been made the same way all of us are made, with the same possibilities, who had followed the path that the world he grew up in made easiest, and had ended up where I was ending up. I saw the whole line of it. The inheritance. The pattern. The thing that had been handed from one generation to the next, not because it was good, but because it was all that was available. And I understood something in that moment that I cannot ununderstand, which is that none of it was inevitable. That every step was a choice. That the choices had consequences that went far beyond me. That the people who loved me had absorbed those consequences in their bodies and their children and their sleeping hours and their hidden prayers for 30 years. That what I had thrown a match at tonight was not just my wife, but the last 30 years of her love for me, which had cost her everything and which I had just tried to set on fire. I was on the floor. I do not remember going down. My back was against the wall, and my legs were out in front of me, and my hands were flat on the carpet, and the matchbox was somewhere nearby, and I was looking at my wife standing intact in the middle of our bedroom, in a light that was still slowly withdrawing, and something in me, something that had been clenched for 58 years, came apart. Not gradually, all at once. The way a structure comes apart when the last thing holding it together finally gives. I cried. I am going to tell you that plainly without any of the framework I would have built around it 3 years ago to make it sound less than it was. I cried the way a man cries when he has been holding something for decades, and the holding has finally exhausted every muscle he had, and there is nothing left to do except let it come. I cried with my hands flat on the floor of my own bedroom, the room where I had been impossible and frightening and absent and drunk for 30 years, and the sound that came out of me was not a sound I recognized as belonging to me. Patricia came to me. She knelt down on the floor in front of me. She took my face in her hands. My face. The face that had looked at her with contempt and fury and the specific cold expression of a man who has decided that the person in front of him is the problem. She took it in her hands, the way you hold something fragile. And she looked at me. And what was on her face was not what I had earned. It was not what a reasonable accounting of the previous 30 years would have produced. What was on her face was the thing she had been praying about in secret for 30 years, which was the possibility of this exact moment, which she had believed in and held on to and refused to relinquish even on the worst nights, even when no evidence supported it, even when every rational analysis would have told her to close that door. It was love. Still there. After everything. Still there. I could not speak right away. When I found my voice, it was not my voice, or rather it was my voice without any of the things I had used my voice to maintain for 58 years, without the wall and the contempt and the performance of not needing anything from anyone. It was just sound, just whatever was underneath all of that. "Patricia," I said. "I saw him. I saw him in this room. I am sorry. I am sorry for everything. Every night, every word, everything I took from you and from the kids and from this house. I am sorry, and I do not know if sorry means anything after everything I have done, but I need to say it. I need to ask you. Is there still time? Is there still any chance that what you have been asking for all these years is something he would give to someone like me?" She did not hesitate. She did not make me wait for an answer the way I had made her wait for 30 years. She said, "I have never stopped asking for you. Not one day, not one night. The answer was always yes. It was always yes." I bowed my head. I, Dale Merritt, who had not bowed my head for anything or anyone in 58 years of life, bowed my head on the floor of my bedroom, with my wife's hands still holding my face, and I said the only prayer I knew how to say, which was not a structured prayer, and not a theologically correct prayer, and not the prayer of someone who knows what they are doing. It was the prayer of someone who has nothing left and knows it, and is past the point of pretending otherwise. "Jesus," I said, "I don't know how to do this. I don't know the right words. I know what I did tonight, and I know what I have done for 30 years, and I know there is no argument I can make for why you should accept what is being offered here, because what is being offered here is not much. But I am asking. I am asking the way a man asks when he has run completely out of everything else. Accept me, however I am, whatever I have been. Accept me, and start whatever comes after this, because I cannot go back to what was before this." And then I was quiet. Patricia was quiet. We stayed on the floor of that bedroom for a long time that neither of us measured, kneeling together in the room where it had happened, in the room where 30 years of something had just ended and something else had just begun. And the silence was not the silence I had known in that house for decades. It was a different quality of silence entirely. The silence after something has been resolved, rather than the silence of something that cannot be spoken. It was after midnight when Patricia called Jason. I want to tell you about that call from my side, because I was sitting in the living room when she made it, Patricia's Bible open in my lap, the Bible she had hidden from me, and I could hear her voice from the kitchen, and I could hear the specific quality of her crying, which was different from the crying I had heard from her for 30 years. That crying had a weight to it, the weight of sustained grief. This crying had a different quality, lighter. The crying that comes from relief rather than from loss, from something finally arriving rather than something being continuously withheld. Jason was there in 15 minutes. I heard his car in the driveway. I heard the front door. I heard him come into the hallway and stop. I stood up from the chair. I stood up with the Bible in my hand, Patricia's Bible, the one she had hidden in our house for years to keep it safe from me, and I walked to where my son was standing. He was 30 years old, and he had the face of a man who had prepared himself for many possible versions of what he was going to find in this house on a phone call from his mother at midnight. This version was not one he had prepared for. He stood in the hallway and he looked at me, and he looked at the Bible and he looked at my face, and he did not move. I went to him. I did not wait for him to decide what to do with his arms. I went to him and I put my arms around my son, and I held on. His arms were at his sides for a moment, the arms of a man whose body has learned over many years not to expect embrace from this direction. And then they came up, and he held on back, and we stood in the hallway of that house and held on, and I felt in that holding the specific physical reality of 30 years of distance beginning to close. At 2:30 in the morning, Jason called his sister. I was not in the room for that call, but Patricia told me about it afterward, about the 5 seconds of silence after Jason said what he said, about the sound of Melissa beginning to cry on the other end of the line with the specific quality of crying that belongs to news you have been waiting for so long that the arrival of it breaks something open in you that the waiting had sealed shut. Before I tell you about that Sunday, I want to tell you about the days between the night and the Sunday, because those days were their own thing, and they mattered. The morning after was the strangest morning of my life. I woke up without the hangover I should have had, which I noticed, and I woke up with the full, unfiltered memory of the previous night, which I also noticed, and the combination of those two things, the physical clarity and the total absence of the buffer that alcohol had always provided between me and the reality of what I had done, was an experience for which I had no precedent. Patricia was already up. I found her in the kitchen making coffee, the same thing she had done every morning of our marriage. She turned when she heard me, and we looked at each other across the kitchen, and neither of us said anything for a moment. Then she poured a second cup and set it on the counter for me. I sat at the kitchen table with the coffee and I looked at my hands. The hands that had held the matchbox, the hands that had poured the alcohol, the hands that had been flat on the floor of the bedroom 4 hours earlier when they had nothing left to grip. They were my hands, the same hands they had always been, calloused from 20 years of bar work and general labor, with the specific wear on the palms that comes from certain kinds of repeated physical tasks. They looked exactly the same as they always had. Nothing about them advertised what had happened the night before, or what had happened in the hour before that. I thought about that for a long time, about the fact that nothing on the outside had changed. That if you had looked at me sitting at that kitchen table on a Wednesday morning in February, you would have seen the same Dale Merritt who had sat at that table hundreds of times before, drinking coffee, looking unremarkable. And inside, the entire structure was different. The wall was down. The thing behind the wall was exposed and present, and not as terrible as I had spent 58 years making sure I would never have to look at it directly. The self that had been keeping everything at a distance was no longer doing that job, and the world without that distance was simultaneously more painful and more real than anything I had known. Patricia sat across from me at some point. We talked, not about the night, not directly, not yet. That conversation would take more than one morning. We talked the way two people talk when they are feeling their way into a new version of something familiar, carefully, with attention to where the ground is solid and where it might not be. She asked how I was. I said I was different. She said she could see that. She did not press it. She let me hold the coffee cup and sit in the kitchen of our house and be a man who was trying to figure out what came next. The following Sunday, Patricia and I walked into church together. Her church. The one she had been attending alone for 27 years. I want to tell you what that walk was like, because it was one of the most significant things I have done in 61 years of life, and I want to give it the weight it deserves. We walked in together. Her on one side, me on the other, holding hands, each with a Bible. I had not set foot in a church since before our first anniversary. The last time I had been in one, I had been there under protest, for a family event, and I had spent the entire time cataloging everything that annoyed me about the experience, and had told Patricia on the way home exactly what I thought of organized religion in terms that I will not reproduce here. This time I walked through the door because I wanted to be there, and the wanting was so new and so unfamiliar that I kept checking it the whole drive over, the way you keep checking a wound to see if it is still there. It was still there. It was real. 3 rows behind us, Jason was sitting with his wife and their 2 kids. I know this because Patricia told me. I could not see them from where I was sitting, and I did not turn around. I was already managing everything I was capable of managing, which was being present in that room without the armor I had worn for 58 years, without the wall, without the performance of someone who does not need anything. I sat in that pew with Patricia's hand in mine and a Bible in my lap, and the specific experience of a man who has arrived somewhere he never expected to arrive, and is not sure yet of all the dimensions of what he has been given. After the service, a man came up to me. I did not know him. He had heard something from someone, the way things spread in small communities, not the whole story, just that something significant had happened with Dale Merritt. He shook my hand, and he said something to me that I think about often. He said, "However long it took, you made it." I said, "I did not make it. Something found me." He looked at me for a moment, and then he nodded and said, "Yes. That is exactly how it works." I want to tell you something about the specific quality of the silence after I finished praying on the floor of that bedroom, because the silence was its own event, and it deserves to be named. We stayed on the floor for a long time, Patricia and I. I do not know how long. Long enough for the cold of the February night to make itself felt through the floor. Long enough for the physical reality of what I had done in that room to settle around me without the alcohol to filter it. Long enough for Patricia to start to cry again, but quietly, the kind of quiet crying that has relief in it rather than grief. We did not say much. The things that needed saying had been said, the ones that were available in that moment, and the ones that were not available yet, the ones that would take months and years to find their way into language, were not yet formed and did not need to be forced. At some point I became aware that the matchbox was still on the floor near the wall where I had ended up. I reached over and picked it up and held it, and looked at it for a long time. This ordinary object, the kind that sits in a kitchen drawer in every house in the country, the kind you use to light candles or a gas stove or a fireplace, the kind that has no intrinsic character of its own and takes on whatever character the person holding it brings to it. I had brought something terrible to it that night. I set it on the nightstand, not to keep it, not as some kind of memorial to the worst thing I had ever done. I set it there because putting it down felt like the right physical expression of the only thing I knew how to do in that moment, which was to stop. I have thought about that matchbox often in the 3 years since. I have thought about what it means that the instrument of the worst moment of my life was an ordinary object from my own kitchen. I have thought about the fact that I walked to that cabinet and took that thing out with a specific intention, and that what happened next was the complete and total reversal of that intention by something so much larger than me that the reversal was not even dramatic. It was just obvious. The way the truth is obvious once you are able to see it clearly. I want to tell you about the months after, because the story does not end with the night in the bedroom, and I think it would be dishonest to close it there as though the moment of conversion is the conclusion. It is not the conclusion. It is the beginning. And what comes after the beginning is the actual work, and the actual work is long, and it requires things that the moment of conversion does not automatically provide. I want to tell you about the first Sunday morning before I tell you about the months after, because the first Sunday morning was its own thing, and it belongs in this account. Patricia and I had been talking the night before about going to church together. I had said I wanted to go. I had meant it when I said it. But Saturday night I lay awake for a long time running through versions of what Sunday morning was going to be like, and most of those versions ended with me in the pew feeling like an imposter, like a man who had wandered into a room that was built for a different kind of person, like someone wearing borrowed clothes that did not fit. I had dismissed church for 27 years with the specific contempt that comes from distance, from never having been inside a thing you have already decided to reject. and now I was going to be inside it, and I did not know what I was going to find there. What I found was people, not perfect people, not people whose lives were obviously and visibly more ordered than mine, not people who looked at me with assessment or suspicion or the particular expression I had been prepared for, the expression of a room that knows who you are and has already decided what to make of you. What I found was people who had their own damage and their own histories, and who had found in that room something that was holding them, and who were willing to let a man from Harlan County who had poured alcohol on his praying wife 2 weeks ago sit in the same pew and hold a Bible he had never opened and try to figure out where to put his hands when everyone else closed their eyes. The pastor preached that morning from the book of Luke, about a son who had gone away and wasted everything and come back to a father who was watching for him. I had heard that story described before, dismissively, in the way people describe things they have not actually read. Sitting in that pew with Patricia's hand in mine and Jason 3 rows behind me, I heard it for the first time. I heard it as the story of a man who had done exactly what I had done, which was to take everything given to him and waste it, and come back to ask for something he had not earned. And the father in the story ran, not waited, ran, toward the son who had wasted everything, while the son was still a great way off. I had to put the Bible down on my knee for a minute because my hands were not reliable. I got sober, not easily, not without help. I went to AA meetings in Harlan County, and I went to the pastoral counseling that my church offered, and I did the work of facing what I had used the drinking to avoid for 30 years, which was the interior life of a man who had been formed by absence and hardness, and the specific inherited belief that need is weakness. That work was harder than any physical labor I had done in my life. It required me to dismantle things that I had built over decades and to sit in the rubble of them without immediately constructing something new. And the sitting in the rubble was the part that cost the most because I had no practice at it and no template for it. Jason came back slowly, not all at once. Not with the kind of immediate and complete restoration that stories sometimes describe when they are trying to give you the satisfying version rather than the true version. He came back the way trust is rebuilt after damage, in small increments, in the specific, cautious way of someone who has been hurt in a particular place and has learned to be careful about that place even when the conditions have changed. We had conversations that were difficult. I said things that needed to be said, and he received them in ways that were not always what I hoped for, and that was appropriate because what I hoped for was not the same as what I had earned, and knowing the difference was part of what I was learning. Melissa came back too. She called Patricia first, then me. The call with me was short and careful, and I did not push it. I let her set the pace. I told her I was sorry, and I meant it completely, and I did not ask her to respond to the sorry in any particular way. She said she needed time. I said I understood. We have been building something since then, something that is still in the early stages, but that is real, and that is moving in the right direction. Patricia, I want to tell you something about what happened with Jason over the months that followed, because his part of this story is something I carry with particular weight, and I think it belongs here. He came back slowly. I said that already, and I want to say it more fully. He came back in the way that adult children come back when the parent they are returning to is not the parent they remember, but a new version of one, and the new version has to be verified over time before the trust can follow. We had coffee together a week after that first Sunday. It was not comfortable. I did not expect it to be comfortable, and I did not try to make it comfortable, which I think was the right instinct, because the discomfort was real, and it deserved to be present in the room. I told him things I had never told him. I told him about the night I watched him leave from the kitchen window, and I told him I had not gone after him, and I told him that was wrong, and that I had known at the time it was wrong, and I had let it happen anyway. He listened without saying much. He did not tell me it was fine. I was glad he did not tell me it was fine, because it was not fine, and we both knew it. And the fact that we could sit in a room with that knowledge without either of us having to paper over it was the beginning of something real. He brought his kids to the house about 2 months after the night. That was the first time. His older boy, whose name is Caleb, is 7. He came through the front door holding his father's hand, and he looked at me with the specific, careful attention of a child who has been told something has changed and is doing his own assessment of whether the change is real. I crouched down, and I said hello to him, and I held out my hand, and he looked at it, and then he looked at Jason, and Jason gave him the smallest nod, and Caleb shook my hand. I am not going to make more of that handshake than a handshake is, but I am going to tell you that it was the first handshake I had received from that boy in 7 years of his life, and that what I felt when his small hand was in mine was something I had not felt before in any of the 61 years of my life. Something that had the specific quality of being given something you do not deserve, and knowing it, and not being able to do anything with that knowledge except try to be worthy of it going forward. I want to close by telling you about Patricia, because this is her story as much as mine, and maybe more. She prayed for me for 30 years, in secret, in the bathroom with the tap running, and in the car in the parking lot and in the pew of a church she attended alone every Sunday for 27 years. She prayed without evidence that it was doing anything. She prayed through the years when things were bad, and the years when things were worse, and the specific final months when things reached the point they reached on that Tuesday night in February. She never stopped. Not because she was naive or because she could not see clearly what was in front of her. She saw it. She saw it more clearly than I did because she was sober and I was not. She stayed and she prayed because she believed something about me that I had no access to and could not have seen from where I was standing, which was that the person who had been put in me before all the damage was still in there, still findable, still worth the effort of reaching. She was right. That is the most important sentence in this story. She was right. I was the impossible person. I was the closed-off, angry, drunk, contemptuous, unreachable man that people who loved her kept telling her to give up on. I was the lost cause. I was the one who had gone too far and been too hard and built too thick a wall for too many years for anyone to get through. And Jesus walked into my bedroom on a Tuesday night in February in Harlan County, Kentucky, and said my name, and the wall came down. If you have someone in your life like that, someone who seems unreachable, someone for whom the evidence of change has been thin or non-existent for a very long time, someone about whom people keep telling you to be realistic and lower your expectations and stop hoping for the thing that does not appear to be coming, I want to say something to you directly. Do not stop praying. I want to say that with the specific authority of the person who was being prayed for, while not knowing it, and not deserving it for 30 years. I want to say it as the man who is alive, because a woman prayed in secret, in a house that had made her faith into a thing that needed to be hidden. I want to say it as someone who stood at the door of that bedroom and saw what 30 years of persistent, faithful, never-stopping prayer looked like from the outside before I understood what I was looking at. It looked like a woman on her knees in a dark room with a Bible open on the bed and a voice so low it was barely audible. It looked like nothing. It looked like exactly the kind of thing that a person who did not believe would dismiss as private and powerless and entirely without consequence for the world outside the room. That is what it looked like from the outside. From the inside, from where I am standing 3 years later, it looks like the most consequential thing that has ever happened in my life. It looks like the thread that held everything together through the years when everything else was coming apart. It looks like the one thing that was still moving towards something good when everything I was doing was moving away from it. It looks like the reason I am here. Do not stop praying. Not because the praying guarantees the outcome you are hoping for. I cannot promise you that. I can only tell you my story. But I can tell you that the faith that refuses to stop, the prayer that continues in secret in the bathroom, with the tap running when no one is watching, and the evidence is not there, is not weakness. It is not denial. It is not naivety. It is the most powerful thing I have ever seen in my 61 years of life. And the evidence of that power is the fact that I am here telling you this story rather than the other story. The one that ends the way Tuesday night in February could have ended without what happened in that room. Patricia's 30 years of prayer did not produce nothing. It produced me. This version of me. The one who is sitting in church on Sunday morning with a Bible in his lap, and his wife's hand in his, and his son 3 rows behind him, and his daughter calling on Thursdays. The one who is standing up in front of people he does not know, and telling a story that costs him something to tell because the telling matters, because someone needs to hear it, because somewhere a woman is praying in secret for a man who seems impossible, and she needs to know that the God she is praying to has not lost the address. He has not lost the address. He found mine in Harlan County, Kentucky, on a Tuesday in February, in the middle of everything I had made of my life, in the worst moment of the worst night. He came to that specific room, and he said that specific name, and everything I had built to keep him out came down in the time it takes to light a match. If this story reached something in you today, leave a comment right now with these 3 words. Still praying here. Let those 3 words be the testimony of someone who has not stopped, and let them be an encouragement to everyone who reads them in the comments. Because somewhere someone is reading those words who needs to see them today, who needs to know that they are not alone in the waiting, who needs to know that the waiting has a history of ending in the exact moment that makes everything that came before it make sense. Subscribe to the channel and turn on the bell so you do not miss what comes next. Share this with someone who needs it today, someone who is praying in secret, someone who has been told to give up, someone who is on their knees in the bathroom with the tap running for a person who does not know they are being prayed for. Tell them, keep going. The God they are praying to knows that person's name. He is waiting for the right moment, and He is never late. May Jesus walk with you today and in every day that is still ahead of you. Amen. I want to end with something Patricia said to me about 6 months after the night. On an evening when we were sitting on the porch of our house in Harlan County watching the light go off the hills the way it goes in the late summer evenings here, that particular color it turns right before dark. She said she wanted to tell me something about the praying, about the 30 years of it. She said that there had been a night, about 8 years before the night in the bedroom, when she had been sitting in the church parking lot in her car after the evening service, and she had said to God that she was not sure how much longer she could do this. And she meant everything. The marriage, the staying, the praying, the believing that something was coming that showed no signs of coming. She said she had sat in that parking lot, and she had been honest in a way she had not been before, which was that she was tired, and she did not know if she was going to be able to keep going. She said what happened in the car that night was not dramatic, it was quiet. She just felt something, a presence, a specific sense of being with someone rather than alone, and with it a certainty that arrived without argument and without evidence except the certainty itself, that what she was asking for was real, and that it was coming, and that she needed to stay. Not to stay in the marriage necessarily, though that is what she chose, but to stay in the believing, to stay in the asking, to not close the door on the thing she had been praying for. She said, I don't know why I am telling you this now. I just want you to know that the night you went to your knees in that bedroom, I had been waiting for it for a long time. Not waiting the way you wait for a bus. Waiting the way you wait for something you have been told is real, and that you have staked something important on believing. I looked at her there on the porch in the late summer light, and I did not say anything for a while. Then I said, I know what you staked, and I am going to spend the rest of my life being worth it. She took my hand. We sat there until the light was gone. If this story reached you today, leave a comment with 3 words. Still praying here. I will read everyone, and everyone will matter. May Jesus walk with you today, and in every day that is still ahead of you. Amen.